This is the manner in which they would often burn them. So they would wrap their chests with wood and then light it on fire. So they weren't burning them at the stake.
So what do you see on the upper right card? You see a man, he's kind of on all fours.
Yes, almost like a shish kebab, kind of.
That's what's coming.
Now, sometimes they would actually skin the people. Mormon is careful to point out that they were hunted and killed like wild beasts. So it's part of this hunting ritual ceremony, right?
I've never noticed that it was stated to be a ceremony. The following is an episode of WardRadio and does not represent the thoughts or the opinions of KHTS, its owners, or any of its affiliates, nor does it represent the official opinion of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. With that said, sit back, relax, and enjoy the program.
Nehor in Egyptian means of Horus. They would remove the heart and throw it on a fire.
This is a detail I never noticed until you guys said it. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, back to WardRadio. I'm your host, Cardinellis. Today I'm joined in the studio by Josh Gailey, author of Witnessing Miracles, Historical Evidence for the Resurrection, and Book of Mormon. Also, a graduate of the prestigious Archaeology and Anthropology program over there at Penn State. And I'm also... Yeah, rock on. Also, I'm joined by Jerry Garover here, geologist in chief, certified civil engineer, the whole nine yards, author of Calendars and Chronology of the Book of Mormon, another favorite book of mine. And today we're actually going to be diving into some archaeological evidence of the Book of Mormon that is just mind-blowing. I mean, I can't believe what I heard in the pre-show about the shocking death of Abinadi by ritual Mayan human sacrifice. The additional details the archaeologists have come up with about how Abinadi, the beloved prophet of the Book of Mormon, that was sacrificed, burnt at the stake in the Book of Mormon, really the details of what that process would have included are holy smoke. Buckle your seat belts and hold on to your hats. Who wants to take this one? Josh Gailey, go.
Well, let's talk about Abinadi for a moment. He comes in to a group of Nephites that had moved into the land southward into Lamanite territory, and he begins to preach to them and actually condemn them. He's prophesying of Christ. He's preaching about their sins. He's taken captive and then let go and basically said, hey, don't come back.
Did he have his shirt on during this process? Because all the pictures just show him like just shredded and bare-chested. You know what I'm saying? The classic paintings like a Greek god. Do you think he did it that way?
I think he came in soldier's garb and just came in and just rocked the house. Just preached it. It was the best sermon.
Okay, cool.
So in Mosiah 17, then we get the fateful demise of what happens to our beloved prophet there, our beloved Abinadi, who's prophesying of Christ. And in that moment, he's going before a king and a group of the king's priests. And when he does, and he's speaking to them and he's preaching to them, you know, what happens is just a couple of key simple overlays. He's sacrificed under direction of the king and their religious authority. He's bound when that happens. When he is, the descriptions are that his skin is scourged with faggots even unto death. So there's something going on there in the death that's really intriguing and very specific in the text of what's happening. And he speaks briefly while engulfed in, the scene is like when flames are scorching him, he speaks briefly and then he dies and he falls. These are all checkpoints of descriptions of the way Abinadi is being killed here in front of people in this type and under the supervision of a priesthood body in some way, shape, or form. So what's interesting is with all those specifics, the question ultimately is, can we talk about Abinadi's death, the way, the shape, the form, and can we find that in the correct culture of a model for a Book of Mormon model? And it certainly fits the Mayan culture in Mesoamerica, which we're going to talk a little bit about that today. So
wow. So I'm actually reading the scripture here that I was able to actually just look up on the fly, and it says, "And now when Abinadi had said these words, he fell, having suffered death by fire. He having been put to death because he would not deny the commandments of God, having sealed the truth of his words by death." And before it has this totally BA pronunciation, "Behold, even as you have done unto me, so it shall be done unto you." And I mean, this.
and we're going to get there. We're going to talk about that a little bit, because we'll talk about what happens to King Noah and how there's a ceremony. Literal, the word in the Book of Mormon is a ceremony tied to the hunting and execution of what happens to King Noah at the end, as prophesied by Abinadi. But let's hit the first slide and dive in and look at the archaeology a little bit. Jerry, anything you want to toss in as we get going?
Just some other clues. It's ritual. They waited 3 days, so it's actually they're doing it on a particular day. Seems like, and
you've looked at like which day that is. Do you want to chat about that for a moment?
Well, based on the type of sacrifice that matches, it looks to be some sort of New Year's, either year-end or New Year's celebration.
That's how I want to celebrate the new year.
Exactly.
Who don't I like?
Yeah, seriously, dude.
Yeah. And a little bit of the backstory. Everyone always talks about, well, Noah was this Nephite or whatever. What are we talking about, this Mayan culture? But what the backstory is they came into an area to resettle an area that was already had some residual Nephites from long before, who had kind of, I guess you want to call, gone native pagan. So they probably were practicing some form of syncretic religion, meaning
an absorption of a religion from another culture and some blending of that.
Yeah, so that's why you would expect that they're using Maya. And they actually, one of the premises too is that Abinadi was probably one of the priests from the old, the Christian Nephite religion. They were all thrown out, and Noah replaced all of them with his, which is it shows that it's a competing religion, right? Yeah, that they're looking at.
He's adorning a temple. He's doing all these type of things that are, kind of not very much so the religion of the old world that we'd find in the Old Testament and early Book of Mormon phase. This is something very different.
Yeah, and one clue that it probably is a New Year's is because the prophecies that there's actually 4 year bearers in the Maya. The way that the day counts work, every 4 years it starts with the same 4 days in a cycle, and so they have prophecies related to each one of those years.
Because everything in Mayan culture and calendarically is it's cycles, it's cycling, it's cycling.
Okay,
right. Yeah. And basically what they do is they do all these ceremonies, some blood ceremonies at the beginning of the year, to make sure none of those bad things, they have a list of bad things for each one of those years that don't happen. And if those things happen, then they often will kill or throw out the priests or even the king because he failed. There's 1 year, if you look at the prophecies that Abinadi gave sequentially, they actually match pretty close to exactly those things identified in the Maya. So I think what we're saying is, Abinadi, when he was prophesying that these bad things are going to happen, it wasn't just some old guy that wandered in off the street.
Yeah,
he was actually challenging, basically saying, he was challenging King Noah's authority and threatening, that the things that you're guaranteeing won't happen will happen.
And part of that's because even if you think of like in the Mayan culture, okay, and we're going to go into the Guatemalan highlands, and even if you want to pull up the first image slide, Cardin, while we're talking about this. So Mayan kings, when sacrifices were being performed, they were often dressed and adorned with like the god that they were sacrificing, performing a human sacrifice to. And then there was even like this belief system that in that moment they were actually being possessed by the spirit of that god that would like enter into them. And it was part of this deep ritual belief system of the Mayans. So when we look at what's going on with King Noah, we're actually going to dive into that. We're looking at an image where everybody join with us into the mountains of the Guatemalan highlands, and we're going to go to an archaeological site of Kaminalhuyu. These are some pictures from Kaminalhuyu and actually a stela that is there. I want to get the stela number right. I believe it's stela 11 from Kaminalhuyu that shows a king representing this type of what's called concurrence, or this type of like possession that might be going on during a human sacrifice, and Jerry can extrapolate on that a little bit. So,
are you talking about the Nehor issue?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Essentially, in the Book of Mormon, you have this order of Nehor religion, which it originates from the Noah time frame and then builds and grows. Nehor in Egyptian means of Horus. Horus was basically the bird god of Egypt, where they would actually wear the headgear. The priest would wear, a big falcon or like eagle type.
Okay, rock on.
Yeah, and in Mesoamerica, you have a similar practice.
So slide down to the next slide, Carden.
Okay, excellent.
And we're going to be looking at a stela, a giant stone image of a king, and Jerry can.
Yeah, and so they would wear this. It's Amna is the name of the god. It's the principal bird deity that they actually call it. So it actually matches the description of Nehor in the practice of the religion. There's also some other similarities, like Itzamna has 4 representations that represent the cardinal points. Horus has the 4 children, which represent the cardinal points of the compass. So there's actually some correlation going on there.
Wait, so if I understand you correctly, you're saying that just like with Uto-Aztecan, we can prove that, similar to how Greek words like El Mapa ended up in Spanish and El Programa end up in Spanish, that are completely linguistically different than the rest of the gendered language, and kind of prove, end quote, that there was correspondence between the ancient speakers of Spanish, or at least influence, I should say, of the Greek into the Spanish. Just like we can prove with Uto-Aztecan that there was Hebrew influence upon that language group as well. You're now also saying through these stele pictures and so on and so forth that Nehorism, the order of Nehor, and that influential a negative philosophy, shall we say, from the Book of Mormon, actually not corresponded, but influenced.
Yeah, no, correspondence is a good word. There's a convergence between what we find in the text,
convergence, that's
and a
better,
real world setting, and when we overlay it into a real world setting, the story gets enhanced, deeper, richer. We're actually, instead of us struggling to go, well, how does this work? Why are they doing this? We're actually saying, oh, this fits really well in this time and in this place. And so convergence is probably the word that we would use to say this is a convergence of a culture core that King Noah is accepting and blending himself into, and within that, this fits in the real world setting of the sacrifice that's about to be performed and talked about.
Right. So that's just getting a background, and again, the Horus Itzamna correlation. It could be that there's some Egyptian influence into that religion, but it may just be it matches that particular religion that the Nephites are familiar with, so they're calling it like the Horus religion of Egypt, right? So they're giving it a name, their own name, to this particular religious practice.
And even for Abinadi, who's coming in and he's prophesying that Jesus Christ will come and take upon himself flesh, and that's the reason for the execution. Not that you're sinning, not the judgment, but actually the fact of Jesus Christ will come and dwell in a tabernacle of clay, and that's executable, because that would be a push and a violation against this concurrence belief of the king being, and his power and his preeminence in he himself possessing this deity as these sacrifices are being performed. That's the threat. It's the threat against the kingdom.
Okay, cool, awesome. Keep going. I'm loving this. This is great.
Do you want to get into the sacrifice itself?
Yeah, let's do that. Let's go to the next slide, and I'm going to let Jared go and start talking about the exact sacrifice that we find within Mayan culture. And what we're going to do, a couple of these artifacts are going to post-date Book of Mormon times, but you have to keep in mind the overwhelming perspective, even from like Michael Coe and leading anthropologists and archaeologists that study out the Mayan culture and the Mesoamerican cultures, is that what we find in the ceremonies that we find in the archaeological record predate. So we might have artifacts that date to classic times like 600 AD or 700 AD, but we would verifiably and pretty assertively say there's archaeological evidence to say that they predate as well, and they go pretty early. So we're looking at some artifacts that post-date Book of Mormon times, describing ceremonies that we would argue archaeologically date pretty early.
Okay, cool. Awesome. All right. So here I'm looking at a giant mural that's obviously from Gosh, where is this from? A scaffold vase depicting the deer man sacrifice, and the citation is Kerr 2016. Okay, that's awesome. And it looks like a very traditional Mayan painting of a man being dragged almost like that old movie from the 80s.
So what do you see on the upper right card? And you see a man, he's kind of on all fours.
Yes, like almost like a shish kebab, kind of.
That's
like,
what's coming.
Yeah, okay, exactly. Describe what's going on.
Okay, well, as you see, it talks about Abinadi was bound, right, by the priests. In that one, what they do is they are binding their hands and their feet, and they're also, that one, I don't know, it shows it's bound to the scaffold itself, but they didn't have to. And so they would position them like an animal, like a deer. Now, there was a certain ritual called Pakum Chak, among the Maya, where they would actually they would get a captive, and they actually preferred valuable captives like kings and things that actually was more powerful.
Really?
Yeah,
Jeez, okay.
because they would get power from, there's certain things that you got from the ritual, and they would either shoot arrows at them or jab them till they were bleeding, and then they would take the blood and do some of their rituals, or they would pierce the foreskin of themselves and then bleed into a paper and then burn it. So there were actually different blood ceremonies that they would do,
matching some of the description of him being like scourged with faggots as part of this activity.
Wow. Okay. Yeah.
And this ritual is described by Landa when at the conquest that they were doing, and so it's actually the actual ritual is documented.
That's Bishop
that
de Landa, one of the Catholic priests that burned all the books, but then also wrote about on the other hand, he wrote about what was going on. So on one hand, he destroyed all the information, and then on the other hand, he preserved some information.
Exactly. Man, if there was one thing we could go back and do, in time and history, geez, man, stopping that little codicy fire. You know what I'm saying? That was, or codex fire.
That one in Alexandria. If we could stop a couple of fires that took place.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so keep going, Jerry.
Yeah, sometimes they would actually skin the people down to, except for their feet and their hands, flay them before they died. They weren't dead. They would skin them alive. I'm not saying that Abinadi matches that, but there are all kinds of horrible things that they did during some of these
the
rituals.
Mayans would skin people alive down to the feet and the hands?
Yeah. The Aztecs people would volunteer for the sacrifice. They'd get all these gifts and women and everything for a year, and then they would skin them. But they would wear the skin of the guy from the year before that got sacrificed. So they would keep the skin and wear it.
What?
So I'm just saying, Mesoamerica was not.
I thought that guy that Silence of the Lambs was based off of was just nuts, man. This is like ritualist. Oh my goodness gracious. Okay, keep going.
Yeah, well, along Silence of the Lambs, what they would do is they would remove the heart and throw it on a fire and then eat it. So they did that too.
Jeez.
So essentially you have this happening, and then if you want to go to the next slide,
okay.
Then this is the manner in which they would often burn them. So they would wrap their chests with wood and then light it on fire. So they weren't burning them at the stake. So you can imagine. So Abinadi is in a position, on all fours,
strapped with sticks.
Yeah, and then he's got that wrapped around his chest, and then they burn him, and then part of the ceremony too is that Landa recorded was they would fall from the scaffold. Sometimes the scaffold will just collapse, but maybe from the fire, but onto a bunch of sharp stones, and so that's when it says that he fell, right? And so,
what is this, like Mortal Kombat's fatality on the bridge? Like, holy smoke, this is crazy.
Rough stuff. It's rough stuff.
Now you say these bundles of sticks were strapped to their chest, but it looks like these are strapped to their back on this figurine specifically.
Yeah, well, because it's kind of, it's because at the front of him, there's a little hole there or something. So
yeah, there's some utility to it.
Okay.
Yeah,
all right.
right.
Awesome. Okay. Keep going.
as you can kind of see that they had to wrap, it would have gone all the way around. There's kind of a rope type thing.
Okay. So they just would have literally wrapped the body of the person in flammable materials and kindling, for lack of a better term. Okay.
Right.
And then just set him on fire. And would he die from the burns, or would he die from not being able to breathe because there's too much smoke inhalation? Would they... Because European
all kinds of great ways to go with this garden, I think.
Okay.
So yeah,
Holy
I think
smokes.
blood loss. I mean, you can tie in about 3 or 4 different ways that you're suffering to death in the midst of this absolutely horrific sacrifice.
How could just so many people just watch this? Just desensitization over such a long period of time, or what?
Particularly in the presence of the king and the priests, as it's being described in the Book of Mormon.
Jeez Louise.
Yeah. In my book, I did this. It was like the actual cause of death may have been bleeding to death, fire, or falling from the height onto the stones, or a combination of some or all. So it's like I say, I don't know actually how he died. And actually in the Book of Mormon, you see this, they call it death by fire. They actually refer to this ritual a couple other different times, right? So that's kind of a name that they've assigned to this type of a killing ritual.
Okay. Wow. Holy smoke. All right. Keep going, my man. Keep going.
Well, so when you go from there, the prophecy of Abinadi as he's like dying at the stake here. I know it's not dying at the stake. That's literally the wrong analogy, but dying while strapped on all fours to a scaffolding and getting burned alive. You know, he prophesies and says, "What's happening to me will happen to you, King Noah." So what we find in the story, and like if you go into like Mosiah chapter 19 and Mosiah chapter 23, is the fact that Noah eventually, gets pursued, and he gets pursued and he's put to death. And it says when he's put to death that there was the word is actually that there's a ceremony going on. So it's a ceremony, ritualistic death. And so it seems to be that not only was Abinadi possibly sacrificed this way, but at the end, very possibly King Noah is suffering a very similar form of ritualistic sacrifice. And we know it's a ceremonial sacrifice because that's what the Book of Mormon says.
Yeah, and what happens there is he was actually killed by his own followers. And they were coming out of the wilderness or woods, and they encountered these Lamanites that were also after him. And then it says that they then completed the ceremony, right? It wasn't complete. Part of that ceremony that probably wasn't done was the collection of the blood, where they would actually collect the blood from the victim and do different rituals with it. And they wanted, the king of Laman wanted Noah because he was a king, right?
Yeah.
And so they valued, these are high value sacrifice, right? They valued it was like if you get a warrior and sacrifice him. That's a much better sacrifice than just some slave, right? So.
Yeah, this is so intriguing. I mean, I am reading, the scripture right here, and I'm going to put it up on the screen so everybody can see this. This is a detail I never noticed until you guys said it, but this is a detail I never noticed, that it said, and the people told the men that Gideon that they had slain the king, so on and so forth. And in verse 24 right here, I'm highlighting it for people that can see on the screen. I'm reading it for people that are listening on radio. And it came to pass that after they had ended the ceremony, that they returned to the land of Nephi. I'd never seen the slaying of King Noah. I've never noticed that it was stated to be a ceremony in the Book of Mormon. That is intriguing.
Yeah. So when an anthropologist or an archaeologist or somebody with that type of background reads this, what they're looking at, we read it and we go, oh, what a horrible death for Abinadi, but let's read his lovely words and study that in Sunday school and talk about Christ.
Yeah.
And that's beautiful, and we should. But what an anthropologist might do when they're reading it is, there's a ritualistic sacrifice, a human sacrifice going on in a particular time and in a particular place. Let's see if within a model of Book of Mormon lands, if we can find this in the real world and see if it overlays and matches the descriptions of what's going on in the text. And the answer is within a Mesoamerican model is absolutely yes. We find it happening in the correct place, in the land southward, in the Guatemalan highlands at the correct time period. And so there's a lot of overlap here and overlay, which just is a bullseye and a direct match.
Awesome. Last 60 seconds. Go, Jerry.
Okay. The other thing is that also the priests of the king of Noah, kind of that prophecy saying they will die in the same manner. Mormon is careful to point out that they were hunted and killed like wild beasts. So it's part of this hunting ritual ceremony, right? So it's actually matching.
Now, why did the good guys, Gideon and so on and so forth, end up doing that way? Was it just out of spite that they ended up killing King Noah in the exact same way, and they were kind of violating their own proto-Christian ethos, or like what?
Well, they were his followers, right? These are the priests themselves killed Noah because
Oh yeah, you're right. He was killed by his own, not by the.
And again,
oh yes,
correct.
Okay, you're right.
They're following the same pagan religious practice, right? And so,
wow, this is brutal. Just absolutely brutal. Whew! I feel like I just need to take a break.
Next episode is the reenactment, Carmen.
Oh yeah, geez. That's brutal. That's awesome. All right. Well, guys, this has been absolutely incredible. Before we go, if you guys have a chance, check out Josh Gailey's book. It is called Witnessing Miracles, Historical Evidence for the Resurrection of the Book. For the Resurrection and the Book of Mormon. And also, if you have a chance, please check out Jerry Grover's book, Calendars and Chronology of the Book of Mormon, where he talks about all the super cool calendars and how they add up and explain all these different prophecies and so on and so forth in the Book of Mormon. As always, it has been real and it has been fun. It's been real fun. For this and more, please check us out at wardradio.com.